right? So this is what they do.
Constantine was a great military commander, and when it was his turn to become a junior emperor, he decided to fight his competition.
Constantine, the pagan commander of Rome's Western army, declares war on the commander of the East to decide who will be sole emperor of Rome. And the day before the battle, he has a startling vision.
He looks up and sees.
It's funny how they say this pagan commander when the Catholics wear the same ornamentary. They worship through the same images. They worship the same deities as these deities. This Constantine, Hermes, all these different are worshipped through Christianity. They don't just worship the Creator. So that's what pagan means, is worshiping some other than the Creator. And if you're worshiping Jesus, you're a pagan. That's more than one Creator, God, and that you worship. So when they talking all this crap, you gotta see through the lies.
Sign of the cross.
And he thought it was a promise from Jesus that he would win the battle.
Constantine does win the battle, and the new emperor is forever changed by his vision.
He decides he's going to be a Christian.
One of his first official acts as the first Christian emperor of Rome is to issue the...
You see how they go, oh yeah, Christianity was just created, right? They try to say zero, but when you watch Joseph Atwill's and read his information, you see that no, they lied. It was more like 70 something, more towards 100 AD or whatever. So they lied. So it's not hundreds of years like they're trying to say. So there's a less of a gap. If you consider 2,000 years or whatever it's been, 100 some other years was my ancestors creating Christianity. And then for the past 2,000 years was the Romans adopting Christianity. No, it wasn't. Romans, who are the brothers of Israel, right? They're the brothers of Jacob, who always was against them, who had their own theology, that's similar to their father's theology, but has a twist, right? The Son of God. And they're pushing their beliefs because they have the might, right? The sword. It's their era, their time. Shall rule by the sword. So they're pushing their theology on their brethren, and then educating their brethren that, oh no, you created this and we adopted it from you. No, they created it. They planted it in our heads and drilled it into our heads into today, where anybody can tell you who Jesus is. Anybody can tell you a Christian holiday. And if they're really the people of the Bible, where are these holidays coming from? When you can track the holidays to pagan beliefs and rituals, which even though you're unaware of, you're still You're still enacting these rituals, right? It doesn't matter, even though you're unaware of yours being a slave in America. It doesn't matter, you're still paying the taxes and doing these things that a slave would do.
Edict of Milan. This not only makes Christianity legal, but favored.
This is the big one. For the first time, a Roman emperor decided to ally with the church. That meant the whole of the known world was at the disposal of the church.
As Constantine moves Christianity from outlawed to exalted, church and state become intertwined.
Constantine saw in Christianity a way of uniting the empire, a new ideology that would give everybody the same God, the same moral values.
Constantine, by legalizing Christianity, opened up a space where the Bishop of Rome could become a permanent fixture on both the spiritual and the political scene.
What Constantine did is take the bishops who had been previously persecuted and make them his agents. He treated them like members of his administration. So now he would take the Bishop of Egypt, the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Bishop of Athens, and state power would go through them.
Bishops become important people in the local community. If people have disputes with each other, they are as likely to go to a bishop to get it sorted out.
You had to go to him to get the food supply. That made him enormously wealthy and enormously influential.
Constantine gives Romans a political and financial incentive to convert to Christianity. He gives Christians tax breaks and makes churches tax exempt.
Constantine is the reason why churches are now in the U.S. tax-free entities.
So now today you have 501c3 because of Rome and the Emperor of Rome. So you don't realize today you are doing the Roman thing. We are enslaved. Our birth certificate, social security number, right? Paying this tax, which constitutionally not needed to be paid, right? Using Roman tax laws. Roman imagery, the eagle, all this different stuff.
Constantine is the reason why churches have this special status.
From the time of Constantine, the church had been the ally of the emperor, and the church became the ally of rulers as rulers became Christian. There was no feeling that there should be a separation between church and state. Church and state work together.
Look,
to honor his new
show you the arches, arrows. The arches represent concrete, man. The victories over these people and the beliefs, the culture.
Faith, Constantine commissioned spectacular building projects in Christ's name throughout the empire.
Oh, Christ's name.
Among the most famous of them, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the holiest places in Christendom. The slab on the floor is the place where they say Jesus was originally buried.
Oh, Jesus was buried. See this shit?
But almost as soon as Christians are free from Roman persecution, they begin fighting with each other.
The biggest problem during this time was doctrine. In some people's eyes, Jesus was born of a woman. He can't be divine. And there's big questions about whether is Jesus a human? Is he divine? Is he both?
You would think, wow, this is kind of hair-splitting doctrinal difference here. But
so the people of the old ways are saying, no, this Jesus is nothing. He's an alien. He's a fiction. He's a creation. He's a military strategy.
But there, some people were willing to kill you for that. See, so Christians willing to kill other Christians for those differences.
No. Hebrews defending the Creator against propaganda, which was created Christianity, which is why they say, oh, your Bible contradicts itself. That's the contradiction.
To unite the empire, Constantine must gather his bishops under one church, or risk having the Christian empire he's built come crashing down.
Christian empire he built.
Under Constantine and the Bishop of Rome, Christianity has gone from an outlawed sect to the ruling force of the Western world.
Constantine was both the head of the state and he was the head.
Oh, okay. Now let's get to the bottom.
The world who are questioning the historic facts behind these ancient mysteries. When examining the actual history of this era, many of the answers provided by the Church and Christian scholars do not hold up to rigorous scrutiny.
This is really important for our culture, to understand where Christianity came from.
No doubt Christians have done a lot of good for the world.
No doubt.
But then there are other Christians, often the most dogmatic, who create wars, hatred, and other harm under the disguise of religion. In studying how Christianity emerged, many of our scholars agree that it was used as a political tool to control the masses of the day, and it is still being used this way today.
The problem is that Christianity has been used as a tool by government that uses the goodness in
Church
people
and government,
against
no separation.
them. For
Church
example,
and state.
support for the wars in the Middle East has been preached to evangelical Christians as a way to speed up the end of days. This is just one example of the way that propaganda is used to control and manipulate the populace. Actually, according to my study of the ancient texts, the second coming of the Christ has already occurred.
Already.
Maybe we need to expand the possible answers about how Christianity originated, and deeper questions need to be asked. Maybe we need to examine what political motives were behind the formation of the Christian religion.
I think it's a requirement of alert citizens to know how the Gospels were written, why they were written, who produced them, what was the purpose and back of all this. This is good citizenry. Everyone should be involved in this.
Today, we live on the brink of an immense paradigm shift. And this modern time is very parallel to the era in which Christianity emerged. Studying this ancient era can give us the perspective needed for coming up with solutions to today's problems and for helping create the better world that we envision.
In all of this, we're dealing with literature. We're not dealing with history. So the answer is no, there is no history to this character of Jesus. It's entirely a literary creation.
Some of our Bible scholars are mavericks, working outside the restrictions of mainstream religious institutions. This allows them the freedom to provide fresh insights and draw some startling conclusions about how Christianity was formed.
I began reading a number of books on the subject. This turned into a decade-long research.
For Joseph Atwill, the key was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the only Jewish literature ever discovered from the 1st century AD or CE, the time that Jesus would have been preaching among the Jews.
The characters in the Dead Sea Scrolls were militaristic, and you could see that this movement wanted to push the foreigners out of Israel. They were fundamentalists. Whereas the characters in the gospel are different. They are pacifistic. They are turning the other cheek. They're giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. How did a movement like Christianity come to exist in a region that was occupied by Roman soldiers and had Jewish zealots within it that were going to push these Romans out? How was that possible? I began studying the other two major works of the era, the New Testament and Wars of the Jews by Josephus, a Roman court historian who described the war between the Romans and the Jews in the first century. While reading these works side by side, I noticed an amazing connection between them. Certain events from the ministry of Jesus seemed to closely parallel episodes from the military campaign of Roman Caesar Titus Flavius, a campaign which took place 40 years after Jesus supposedly lived. My efforts to understand these connections led me to an incredible discovery. Christianity had been invented by a little-known family of Roman Caesars, the Flavians, and they left us documents to prove it.
The Flavians are not a household name, and yet it's the Flavians who completely reshaped the Roman Empire. In Rome, of course, there's the Colosseum, which is understood to be the best-known monument of the ancient Roman Empire, perhaps. The Colosseum is, in fact, a Flavian construction produced during the Flavian period. It's under the Flavians that both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity take shape.
Why would the Flavians be interested in creating religions? Much like today, their era was marked by political power struggles, a bankrupt economy, religious conflicts, and endless wars. In the midst of this turmoil, the Flavians seized control of the Roman Empire and ushered in an immense paradigm shift. To understand the Flavians' rise to power, we need to go back to the reign of the previous powerful rulers, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Beginning with Julius Caesar in the year 49 BCE, the Julio-Claudians ruled Rome for over 100 years, transforming the government from a republic into an empire. This family contained all the famous Caesars: Julius, who predated the time of Jesus; Augustus, who was Caesar at the time of Jesus' supposed birth; Tiberius, who ruled during Jesus' supposed death, followed by the infamous Caligula; then Claudius, and ending the Julio-Claudian dynasty with Nero, whose reign begins in 54 CE.
The Julio-Claudians enjoyed a godlike status until the family degenerated and began to damage the Roman Empire.
By the time of Nero, his famous decadence was bankrupting the empire, and the Jews of Judea were staging a huge rebellion against their Roman rulers.
Judea was one of the many conquered provinces that made up the Roman Empire. This region, which was also known as Palestine, was controlled by a family that served as Rome's tax collector, the Herods.
They were a Greco-Arab family, somewhat possibly Judaized, though only Judaized when it was convenient to please the subjects they were given, who were put in power in Palestine and destroyed the previous Jewish ruling family, the Maccabean family, root and stalk.
Besides being heavily taxed and ruled by a non-Jewish family put in power by Rome, the Jews were further inflamed by the requirement that a statue of the Caesar be placed for worship in every temple throughout the empire.
In the Roman Empire, you could pretty much have any god you want, but legally you had to submit to the emperor as a god as well. You had to at least acknowledge that the Roman leader was also a divine figure. But the Jews would not have any of it.
It's fundamental to Jewish belief that you shall make no graven images. It's one of the commandments given at Sinai by God. So the Jews never made representations of God.
The Jews had a very different type of religion. They had a religion which was much more focused on the book and less focused upon cultic statues. This presented a real problem for the Romans. They tried to install statues of Caesar, but the Jews weren't going to buy that at all. In fact, it aggravated them. It enraged them. And the Romans really, I think, didn't understand this. It's not statues, it's books.
And those books contained what are known as the Jewish Messianic prophecies.
The thing that most moved the Jews to revolt against Rome was an obscure prophecy from among their writings that a world ruler would come out of Palestine.
Holy books inspired the Jews to expect a redeemer who would redeem Israel, rescue Israel, restore Israel to power and leadership in the world.
The Messiah that the literature described was a warrior. The Messiahs would have claimed the same attributes that David did. David could overcome any army because God gave him the power to do it. If you had the power of God, you could easily defeat the Roman army. The people rebelled against Rome and were led by a messianic movement that had a series of messiahs that had come forward to fight against the Roman Empire.
The Hebrew word Messiah is translated into Greek as Christos, or Christ. So the title of Christ can describe any of the numerous...
No, because we have the Messiah is the word Messiah in our language. Christos means Roman anointed.
Messiahs of this movement.
Yes, the word Christ or Christians can refer to the Palestine Messianic movement, but it's a later term. It's a later reformulation of the Messianic movement in Palestine.
This movement rebels against Rome in 66 and is successful. It actually defeats them militarily, so it must have been a huge movement. The victorious Jews set up a nation-state directly in the Roman Empire.
And the Romans had to do something about it. There was a real danger that this Messianic movement could not only boil over in Judea itself, but could spread to other Jewish communities in other parts of the Roman Empire.
Rome ruled its colonies with a rod of iron, and any resistance was going to be met with brute force.
At this time during Nero's reign, two of the finest military men in the empire were the Flavians, Vespasian and his son Titus.
Vespasian and Titus were military men. They spent a great deal of their life outside of Rome. For over a decade, they had waged war against the Druids in Brittany and Gaul. Vespasian and Titus were successful in essentially destroying the Druids. They left behind no historical record of their existence.
And it's the Flavians that Nero calls upon when he needs to suppress the Jews' rebellion in Judea.
Nero responded by asking his best general, Vespasian, and his son Titus to go into Judea with a huge army, 60,000, 70,000 troops, and a similar number of support individuals. So they meant business. The Romans came down to crush the rebellion.
In the year 66 CE, the Flavians begin their military campaign against the Jews. They start further north in Galilee, where the first of three key events takes place. They destroy the Jewish towns of Galilee. They also capture a Jewish rebel who later becomes a critical figure in the formulation of Christianity.
This is where they captured one of the leaders of the rebellion, a Jew named Josephus Bar Matthias. Now, Josephus presented himself to the Flavians as a prophet.
He survived. He survived apparently by telling Vespasian that the prophecies of the Jews pointed out that Vespasian would become emperor. And of course he did, so Vespasian quite liked Josephus. He used him as a translator in his entourage. He used him to appeal to the rebels to surrender.
At this point, Josephus became a turncoat and worked with the Flavians against the rebellion.
Meanwhile, chaos is increasing back in Rome, where Nero's rule is being threatened.
In the year 68, the Senate found the courage to depose Nero, and he committed suicide. Now, in that circumstance, Vespasian was a prime candidate to become emperor.
In the middle of this war, Vespasian returned to Rome and seized the throne. Flavians then became the imperial family.
With Vespasian becoming the new...
So Vespasian came home, seeing what was happening, killed Nero, either because he was like, why are you destroying Rome just to recreate it? We don't have the resources. Or he's saying, how could you let them rise to this power? You must die. Either way, Vespasian kills Nero and is in the race to become emperor. But then there's another Idumean king who goes by the name of Bar Isus Monabas. Hold on. So if you look at Jewish Encyclopedia, it goes, use of the name. The name Edom is used by the Talmudists for the Roman Empire. This is why I'm saying that Edom, your brother, the Afro black man, Duke and Duchess, is the Roman Empire. And the Talmudists, the priests of Edom, applied Rome to every passage of the Bible referring to Edom or to Esau. Anytime you see Rome, it should be Esau or Edom. Okay? In Leviticus, Rabbi Rome under the name of Edom is compared to a boar. What do the Romans worship? The boar. Seir. Boar. Right? Think about it. Okay? When you look at the Romans, they're the ones who call themselves the Son of God. Son of God, that is, the Son of Eternal Caesar. King of Kings, divine spirit of the Emperor. You see him? I'm the Lord and God. Test your loyalty. Beast in the arena held him as God. You see? You see? Commonalities. So you gave him the name Visible God. He devastated Jerusalem in 168, defiled the temple, offered a pig on its altar, erected an altar to Jupiter, prohibited temple worship, forbade circumcision on the pain of death, sold thousands of Jewish families into slavery, destroyed all copies of scripture that could be found, and slaughtered everyone discovered in possession of such copies, and resorted to every conceivable torture to force Jews to renounce their religion. This led the Maccabean revolt, one of the most heroic feats in history. The Antiochus bust discovery is important in the study of biblical archaeology. It reveals an image of a man who was mentioned in the book of Daniel. Right?
He was still a Roman, and in the old Roman religion, the emperor was also the chief priest. Constantine definitely took that approach to his faith, rather than, what we would now think of as more of a separation of powers.
But despite Christianity's new political advantage, after centuries of being persecuted for not believing in the Roman gods, Christians are now killing each other over disputes in church doctrine.
Constantine needed a way to bind this empire together. He conquered it, but it was crumbling.
He was angry, and he said, look, these things you're quarreling about are just trivial. I stopped the persecutions. You should be grateful. So he called a council to unify the church.
The Council at Nicaea is the first.
Daughter of Herod, princess of the eastern lands. My family are loyal servants of the Roman Empire, collecting taxes for the Caesar. But the reign of one of Rome's most decadent Caesars, the madman Nero, inspired a great disloyalty within me. For I believe that Nero's hedonistic indiscretion brought a curse on the entire Roman Empire in the form of a powerful uprising of the zealot Jews of Judea. Now, I am proud that my grandmother was a Jewess from the family Maccabees, the lineage from which the Jews' Messiah, or Savior, was prophesied to come. But these revolting zealot Jews believed in a violent, militant Savior who would come to defeat the Romans. And their latest in a string of messiahs, Eleazar, was wreaking chaos throughout the empire. Eleazar and his followers defaced my family's palaces. They raided my grandfather's tomb, and finally they succeeded in burning Rome itself. They had to be stopped. Our only hope was General Vespasian of the family Flavius. Being Rome's leading general for years, he had already crushed a religious uprising in Gaul and Brittany, completely annihilating the Druids there. So Nero called upon Vespasian to obliterate the Jewish uprising in Judea. But Vespasian had ambitions of his own to take the throne from the detestable Nero. And I, at the risk of Nero's vengeance, pledged my family's support to Vespasian and to his family Flavius, who, if successful, would take their place among the gods. Oh, for that I have been called harlot, mistress, and concubine by jealous, ignorant plebeians, and I admit to having flirted with the attentions of Vespasian, whose strength and military power I recognized and respected. But it was the talents of his son, Titus Flavius, that not only captured